question to you, Alison, is how can you begin to start teaching history with preps when we know that preps barely have an understanding about time and distance and concepts like that?
Well, Fran, come over here and I've got our first poster, and you'll see that we've got this open-ended question. Could my grandmother have watered this tree when she was my age?
Okay.
So they are immediately captivated and interested. And to start their learning using the Telstar model, we begin with this tune-in where you spark their interest.
Okay, so how have you done that?
So we've used our question,
Yep.
and we know that in The Lion King, Simba had to go back and find his family to find out who he was.
Right.
So using this character, the children have gone on this journey, learning about the characteristics, learning more about their family. And at this point, I'll ask Tony and Pat to join me.
So how does this relate to their grandmothers? I mean, their grandmother's a member of their family. How do you get them to get that concept of thinking of her as a child? Because she's always been their grandmother. How do you get that concept across to the kids? You know, I never saw my grandmother as being young. You know, probably till...
Well, in this looking stage,
Yeah.
their first reference will be their mother, surely. And the mother will pull out old photographs or things that belong to her mother. Maybe it's the teapot that always made that perfect cup of tea. And in the storytelling and the sharing, they start to get a perspective that, my grandmother was young, she was my height.
So it's important to have those artefacts from that time. Important to have photographs and things from that time.
all that beautiful storytelling.
Good.
Then they've got all this information, start to put together their family tree.
Yep.
Over here, bring it all back to us, and we start to sort this information. And in sorting the information, they start to realise that even though my grandmother might live in the next suburb, when she was my age, she might not have even lived in Australia.
Okay.
You know, she could just have come recently.
And did you see any growth in the kids from when they started this? Did you find that I find that little kids get all mixed up with relationships and how they're related to other people. Did you find there was growth there?
They needed the photos.
Yeah.
Coming back with the photos helped tremendously.
Okay. Storybooks, picture books.
Yeah, went over the relationships in the picture.
Okay. Right. Because that's a whole other concept area that's a bit hard to understand sometimes.
And at the end of our project, Fran, they made an avatar with Lockie where they were the grandmother. So they had to give us those relationships then back to them.
Okay, step in someone else's shoes. Very good.
Which is over here. Exhibit B.
I'm just looking at how detailed that face is. And they're just two legs.
Well, I thought my grandmothers were the same, and when I went and asked my mother, I found
I
out
think
they
that
were.
project's fantastic because it isn't schoolwork, it's actually about people's lives. It's about the students' lives, it's about their families' lives, and actually it's about the teachers' lives as well.
And that's what history is.
Yes.
You know, going up into IGA.
Yes.
My dad climbed that tree when his great auntie lived in that block, on that block, and he used to tell my kids when he came up how he used to climb that tree when he was 3 and 4 years of age.
Wow.
And now when I see that tree there, I think of my dad, who's now 75, climbing that tree when he was 4.
Can you fill us in a little bit of how your unit writing started?
Now, as part of the history curriculum within Cairns, a special writing that we had time out to look at the IVL process for Year 2 we were in. We looked at the Corinda Railway, looking at the Telstar method, and...
Did you have a big question?
We did have a big question, and our big question was, how did the Corinda Railway line change lives?
Okay. Okay. And what year level? Year 2?
Year 2s.
Okay. So was it a difficult concept to work with?
That wasn't too difficult.
Because they haven't lived yet, have they? Year 2s? Only a little bit.
No, it was really good because they all knew about it. They knew the Kuranda Railway. It was a spark of interest that they had, and it was easy to go from there.
Most of them have been on the Kuranda.
If they hadn't been on it, I suppose
Yeah, they'd seen it or knew about it.
Yeah.
They had an experience they could talk about.
Okay.
And all kids love trains.
They
So,
do.
so how did you develop that concept that a railway could change lives?
How did we start? We started by talking about life before the trains. Before, how would you get from Tablelands to down here, and how would we get things from Cairns up to the Tablelands? Spoke about methods of transport they would have used, and then why the need was found to put a railway line in. So I spoke about the tin mine up there and all the produce and things that needed to come down to the port of Cairns, or one of the ports along the coast, and then we spoke about why they chose Cairns over Port Douglas and Innisfail. So yeah, we spoke through.
And we wanted to look at from different perspectives, from the farmer's point of view, the shopkeeper's point of view, the miner's point of view, or the builder of the railway, what their point of view was. So that's what they were able to do. They were able to choose which perspective they want to look at, and they would develop a story about what it was like in that time in one of those perspectives.
And Jodie, you found some great resources. Do you want to tell us a little bit about them?
Yes, Kuranda Scenic Railway, one of the main, the area where the train goes now, is a fantastic website that they have a lot of information that we've developed into our resources with the letters, the information we had, with the story that we had in our history box. They have booklets also on there that you're able to use as teachers and students, so I found them really good. And a booklet that a student brought in, a book.
And what was the highlight of this unit for you?
I think,
Hopefully yet to come with the training.
because yes, we didn't get to go on the train. I think mine was the actual freeze frames, a culmination of those kids sharing their writing, sharing their stories with us was fantastic. It wasn't just us, the kids themselves sat there and watched all of them. And they were different, they weren't the same, so that was a nice thing.
Yeah.
The freeze frames were excellent.
They were a lot of fun.
Well, thank you.
Okay. How did the freeze frames work? Because I wasn't here for that. Sorry.
Freeze frames were, the students had to write a narrative from the perspective of the miner, the builder, the farmer, and then they had to write their story. So they wrote their story, then they had to design their freeze frames as to what they were going to do in groups. And then the person had to read their story, and the other 4 members of their group actually had to do those 4 actions as they were reading, so it's a recorded.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. Sounds really good.
Okay, our unit was on who is the busiest in your family, and the resource that we used to drive our unit was The Smith Family, which is a book that we created of a fictional family set in the olden days. So the father's a blacksmith, the mother volunteers at the church, and the children go to school. Our resources, one of the resources that we used was the 5 lenses of busyness for the students to determine some of the answers to our big question. So we looked at earning the most money, spare time, counting jobs, new learning, and physical, almost tiring.
Did you create the 5 lenses of busyness?
We
or
did.
Did you discover that somewhere?
No, we created it because we felt that with our question it could be answered in one response, like, oh, I think my mum's the busiest because she does the most work. But we wanted to get students to think about the different lenses or the different parts of busyness and what made someone busy.
And did it make the children think more deeply about the issue and you have some better responses?
It did. At first, it was quite difficult because there wasn't one answer to the question, and they found that a little bit difficult. But as we got them to start thinking about, okay, well, if we think about this lens, so using this magnifying glass, let's look at our chart, our retrieval chart, and let's see who is the busiest in relation to earning most money. That might be mum or dad. But then when we look at who does the most learning, well, that might be the student because they're at school all day, those kinds of things.
Do you think your work in class really stimulated a lot of conversations between students and their parents and carers?
Yeah, it did. We had a lot of parents come in into our classroom and talked to us about the fact that the students were going home and asking them questions about their family and what they did and the jobs and the kind of lifestyle that they lived when they were young. So we did find that the parents were involved in the unit as well as the teachers and the students.
And did you find that your unit stimulated a lot of question asking by the students?
Yeah, well, with our with discussion, obviously with any kind of history or soc unit, there is a lot of discussion, and it flowed quite naturally. There was, we really didn't have to kind of prompt them with questions. They came up with a lot of the questions, and it just flowed nice and naturally. So,
Congratulations on a terrific unit, Amanda.
Their big question was ancient Egypt, what's all the fuss? And what they had to do, they had to discuss the significance of the ancient Egyptian contributions in our society today. So how relevant are they today? These projects that are here have been completed by the students who are not up to the level of mainstream, I call them, in my class. So what they've done is they've completed there was a chart of little matrix activities they had to do. So these are little matrix activities that they've done. One's on how the inundation works and how farming calendar actually works around the Nile. This one here is about how the invention of the sundial has been modified it's been tweaked a bit, but we're still using it in some fashion today. This one here is a timeline, and I have to say that when I first got the timeline, I went, it's very, very busy, but she's very artistic. So this was her contribution as a timeline. And this was interesting because what she did here, she looked at the social structure of Egypt and then did a comparison here with Australia. So there were the differences, and then she used that Venn diagram to show what was the same. This one here is done by a young boy who, not quite academically there, but he's got really nice drawing skills, so he produced that map of Egypt. But on the whole, what they did for their assessment was they were asked to communicate what they knew about their sub-question. So they had to research their sub-question and at the end pretty much say how we were using that contribution in our world today. Most of them did PowerPoints, and they didn't do too badly. But at the end, the great thing was that they actually suggested that we change the big question to why is Egypt so mysterious, rather than what's the fuss about Egypt. Yeah.
So from the beginning of the project to the end, how did you think the learning?
How the learning went? Look, I think they learnt lots about Egypt. They were all carrying on about how when they get older they're going over there because it sounds exciting. But one thing that I noticed about the learning is I'm really worried about how the children research because they're having trouble researching. They, in their reflection sheet, they were talking about the fact that one of the things they needed help with was with research and writing questions that they could pop into their Google search engine that would give them the answers, because obviously they don't have the knack writing the right question. But somebody commented today, if you can write that question and get an answer in Google, then it's obviously not a good question. So there was another comment in there that said, thank you for teaching me how to highlight the main point, even though I've been doing that since the beginning of the year. There are things like we would reflect quite often, and that's what gave me the idea to actually create a research plan with them, where we sat down and we had the sub-question and then worked out what questions they needed to answer to get to that sub-question. And they found that really, really tricky as well. So the learning for them is that they themselves have realised that they need to really learn some more skills on how to do better research and how to research properly. And the other one too was note-taking. They still don't get, as one child says, would you please teach me how to write things in my own words because I can't do it.
Well, we were investigating the ancient past, which is one of the depth study for Year 7, and our focus was, should we be custodians of the ancient past? So the children had to select an archaeological discovery and decide whether should they be looking after that archaeological discovery and preserve that discovery and that history. And so through that, they learnt all about that discovery, who discovered it, when it was in existence, when it was destroyed, how they discovered it, so archaeologist or historian documentation. So it was really just introducing history, introducing a little bit on primary and secondary sources, which would follow on from the overview. And they created that in a photo story where they used got images and created a storyboard, a narration of the information, and then presented it as a photo story with some background images, background music and some effects. So we were able to use that for English history result and ICLT. So yeah, it was really good.
Did you find any other questions spring from the one you started with?
Not really, but in reflection, that's something I would like to focus on when I reteach the student, maybe opening up some more questions for the students to pose. I think because I wasn't as familiar and comfortable with teaching history, probably was a little bit hesitant of opening it up too much because I didn't know.
And what about having the Telstar model as your guide?
Yeah, that was a really good guide. I think it just allowed me to broaden some of the areas a little bit more without having a prior knowledge myself. But I have learned so much about teaching history through writing this unit and from the students. I probably could, but I feel confident that I'm not scared now to go and investigate or be asked a question and go, okay, let's look at that together, and I know some more avenues to go, whereas before I had no idea, really.
So you probably find the historical skills the children were developing also along the way?
Yes, and so I was developing those historical skills as well, so it's been a really great learning curve for me as a teacher, and I feel that I've benefited a lot from trialling these.
We're also learning about why it's important to learn about history and why it's important to know where we've come from, where we're going to, what we're doing now, and all of the people that came before us and why they're significant, and that we're still using things that were invented, tools that were invented that have been developed over those years. So within that, there was lots of substantive conversations about contestability when the kids had a different opinion about one object. So for example, I looked at the Stone Age and the kids got a sample, just a picture of a tool. Now this is a flake and it's just a rock that is basically broken in half, but that's all they got. And they had to tell me what era of the Stone Age it came from, who may have used it, how they may have used it, what was it, the meaning for them, and how it helped them in their lifestyle. So as they went further down, it was really interesting to listen to the kids and their conversations because they all disagreed, but they were all justifying their reasons and their opinions, and they were getting to that stage where they knew that there was no right or wrong answer because they were justifying their choices and looking at evidence. So I looked a lot about the significance of things and how what caused something and affected something else and those sorts of things. I started with evolution as well, just by using an interactive site. It comes up. It just shows climate changes and the species that came before the Homo sapiens, and from this they hypothesized and they analyzed what could have caused these to die out and what has helped us, or why are we still in existence. So and it's all interactive, so they clicked on it and bones came up and different faces came up, information about the face came up, so they found that really intriguing. So
I can hear the excitement in your voice as you speak, so I can just imagine you teaching it to the children. How did you, when you first started, how did you feel about history
I was like Jairani. I'm in that generation that didn't get taught history as a child, so my knowledge, even on our first PD day together, was like below for some of the kids, like Jairani said, possibly, because I hadn't been exposed to it, and it wasn't something that I went out and sought for my own development as well. So when I started, I was really, really trepidatious, and using a new inquiry model as well was really trepidatious. But
But did you find you needed all that knowledge to teach it?
No, I didn't. Like, I did lots of research before I started planning, but it was fun, and I got to, I saw some really interesting websites that I'll continually use, and like, yeah, no, I didn't need those skills, and I thought I had to know everything about the historical concepts and the historical skills as well, but I didn't need to, because the kids, through their discussions, brought them up, and I just had to say, well, do you know what you're doing? You're talking about significance here, or you're talking about the effect of something. So, like, that language just came up.
Beck, do you think our big focus throughout the year on understanding historical concepts really helped? Because whatever the content was, you could actually think, well, which historical concept is that illustrating?
It did, and I even have referred to the historical concepts in my science unit and my soc unit this term and last term, because the kids are seeing the connections and how those concepts and those skills can be used in different learning areas as well. So,
What about the language? Do you find they're using it themselves?
My learners whose language is quite developed and they understand the vocabulary are using it in the classroom. My lower learners are not so much, and it could just be flying over their heads a little bit, but at least they're being exposed to the language, and so next year when they hear it all the time, they'll go, I can't tell you what that means, but I've heard it before. So
some of that language was new to teachers at the beginning of the year.
Yes,
so students are doing really well, aren't they?
They are.
As are Beck and Jay Rani. Class act done this to the extent that it's not supporting their performance, it's really holding them back. So it's good for us to experience that too. Jenny even experiences that sometimes. If the crowd's bigger than, say, 500 and there's a live link to somewhere across the world, I might feel slightly nervous then.
We were going to do that this afternoon, but we thought no.
It's all learning, isn't it? Now, who haven't we heard from and filmed this afternoon? Chris?